The Apache girl collapsed against the wooden fence post, just as the sun turned the Arizona sky the color of old blood, her fingers clawing at the dirt while her hollow stomach twisted with a pain that had become her only companion. Warren Brigham heard the sound of something falling against his gate while he was checking the water levels in the horse troughs. The October heat of 1878 still clung to Oro Blanco even as evening approached, and he had been thinking about nothing more than a cold drink and a simple meal when the noise made him turn. What he saw made his heart clench in his chest. A young woman, clearly Apache from her dress and the way her long black hair was tied, lay crumpled against his fence like a discarded doll. Her skin was dusty and drawn tight over her bones, her lips cracked and bleeding. Warren was not a man given to hesitation. He had built his ranch from nothing over the past 6 years, working land that others said was too harsh, too isolated. He had learned to make quick decisions and live with the consequences. He crossed the distance between them in long strides, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. When he reached her, he could see her chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. She was alive, but barely. He knelt beside her, and her eyes fluttered open. They were dark and fierce, even in her weakened state, and they held a mixture of fear and defiance that struck something deep inside him. She tried to pull away, but her body would not obey her will. "Easy now," Warren said, his voice low and steady. "I am not going to hurt you." She did not speak, but her eyes tracked his every movement as he carefully slid his arms beneath her. She weighed almost nothing, and the realization made anger flare hot in his chest. Not at her, but at whatever circumstances had brought her to this state. He lifted her as gently as he could and carried her toward his ranch house, a sturdy adobe structure that stayed cool even in the worst heat. Inside, he laid her on the sofa in his main room and hurried to the kitchen. He pumped water into a cup, then reconsidered and added just a little bit to a bowl instead. He had seen animals that had been without water too long. They would drink themselves sick if given the chance. He suspected the same applied to people. When he returned, her eyes were closed again, but they opened when he touched the wet cloth to her lips. She drank the water he offered in small sips, her hand coming up to grip his wrist with surprising strength. When the bowl was empty, he went back for more, and then more again. Only after the 4th bowl did he dare to bring food. He had beef stew that he had made the day before, thick with vegetables and potatoes. He heated it slowly while she lay on his sofa, her eyes now following him around the room. When he brought her the bowl, he helped her sit up, supporting her weight against his arm. She ate slowly, carefully, and he could see the discipline it took for her not to gulp it all down at once. "My name is Warren," he said after she had finished half the bowl. "Warren Brigham. This is my ranch." She looked at him for a long moment, and he wondered if she spoke English. Then, in a voice rough from disuse and dehydration, she said, "Saya." "Saya," he repeated, and something in his chest shifted at the sound of her name on his lips. "That is a beautiful name." She looked away, and he saw color rise in her hollow cheeks. It was the first sign of life beyond mere survival that he had seen in her, and it made him absurdly happy. Over the next few hours, he gave her more food and water, always in small amounts. He brought her a clean blanket and built up the fire in the hearth, even though the evening was not particularly cold. She was shivering, and he suspected it was from more than just the temperature. When her eyes began to droop, he showed her to his bedroom, the only real sleeping space in the house besides the sofa. "You take the bed," he said when she began to protest. "I will be fine out here." He closed the door to give her privacy and made himself a bedroll on the floor near the fire. He lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the night and wondering what tomorrow would bring. He had just given shelter to an Apache woman in a territory where tensions between settlers and the Apache people ran hot and dangerous. The wars might have been winding down, but that did not mean people had forgotten their grievances on either side. But when he thought of her fierce eyes, and the way she had looked at him with such desperate hope hidden beneath the fear, he knew he had made the only choice he could live with. The next morning, Warren woke to the smell of coffee. He sat up, confused for a moment, then saw Saya standing by his stove. She was unsteady on her feet, one hand braced against the wall, but she was upright and moving. She had found his coffee pot and figured out how to use it. "You should be resting," he said, getting quickly to his feet. She turned to look at him, and he saw that some of the deathly pallor had left her face. "You gave me food and shelter. I should work." Her English was accented but clear, and Warren felt a rush of relief that they would be able to communicate easily. "You are in no condition to work. You could barely stand yesterday." "I am standing now," she said, and there was pride in her voice that made him smile despite himself. "So you are," he agreed. "But that does not mean you need to push yourself. Sit down and have some coffee and we will talk." She hesitated, then nodded and moved to the table. He could see the effort it took for her to walk those few steps, but he also understood that she needed to feel useful, to feel like less of a burden. He poured them both coffee and sat across from her. "How long has it been since you ate properly?" he asked. She looked down at her cup. "Many days. Maybe 2 weeks. The soldiers came to our camp. They were moving us to the reservation. My grandmother, she was sick, very sick. They would not wait for her to be strong enough to travel. They said we had to leave right away." Warren felt his jaw tighten. He had heard stories like this before, but hearing it from someone who had lived it was different. "I stayed with her," Saya continued, her voice soft but steady. "I could not leave her to die alone. My brother, my mother, they went with the others. They had children to think about. But my grandmother raised me when my father died. I could not abandon her." "What happened?" Warren asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. "She died 3 days after the others left. I buried her in the traditional way as best I could alone. Then I started walking. I thought I could catch up with them, but I did not know which reservation they had been taken to. I walked for many days. My food ran out, then my water." She looked up at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I thought I would die too. I was ready for it. Then I saw your gate, and I thought I would rest there. It seemed like a good place to let go." Warren reached across the table without thinking and covered her hand with his. "I am glad you did not. Let go, I mean." She looked at their joined hands, and he started to pull back, afraid he had overstepped. But her fingers curled around his, holding him in place. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "Your people and my people, we have been at war." "You were not at war with me," Warren said. "You were dying on my doorstep. What kind of man would I be if I just let that happen?" "Many men would," she said quietly. "Then many men are fools," he replied. They sat like that for a moment, hands joined across the table, the morning sun streaming through the window and painting everything gold. Warren felt something he had not felt in years, not since before his parents had died and left him alone in the world. He felt connected to another person, like there was a thread running between them that hummed with possibility. Over the following days, Saya grew stronger. Warren made sure she ate regularly, though he had to fight her constant insistence on helping with the ranch work. She was stubborn, he discovered, and proud. She hated feeling dependent, even though her body was still recovering from her ordeal. Finally, he compromised and let her do small tasks in the house, cooking and mending, while he handled the livestock and the heavier labor. He found himself looking forward to coming back to the house each day, to seeing her face and hearing her voice. She had a quiet sense of humor that surprised him, and she was fiercely intelligent. She asked him questions about the ranch, about the cattle and horses, about the market prices and the water sources. She was not content to simply exist in his space. She wanted to understand it, to be part of it. One evening, about a week after he had found her, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was doing that thing it did in Arizona, turning 100 shades of orange and purple and red all at once. "I need to find my family," Saya said suddenly. "I need to know they are safe." Warren had been expecting this, but it still made his heart sink. "Of course. We can go into town tomorrow. Someone there might know which reservation the people from your camp were taken to." She nodded, but he saw the worry in her eyes. "You do not have to come with me." "You have already done so much." "I am coming with you," Warren said firmly. "You are not going anywhere alone. Not yet." The next morning they rode into Oro Blanco together. Warren had given Saya some of his clothes to wear, pants, and a shirt that she had to belt tight to keep from falling off. He had also given her a hat to shade her face and hide her features. Even though the major conflicts were over, there were still plenty of people who would cause trouble for an Apache woman traveling through town. Oro Blanco was a small settlement, mostly miners and ranchers, with a handful of shops and a saloon. Warren tied up their horses outside the general store and went inside with Saya close behind him. The store owner, a man named Paul Hendricks, looked up from his ledger and smiled. "Warren, good to see you. What brings you to town?" "Information," Warren said. "There was a group of Apache moved through here about 2, maybe 3 weeks ago. They would have been headed to a reservation. Do you know which one?" Paul's smile faded and his eyes flicked to Saya with obvious suspicion. "Why are you asking?" "Because I am asking," Warren said, his voice taking on an edge. "Do you know or not?" Paul hesitated, then shrugged. "San Carlos, most likely. That is where most of them have been going." "It is up north near the Gila River." "How far?" Saya asked, speaking for the first time. Paul looked startled to hear her voice, but he answered. "Maybe a week on horseback, longer if you are walking." Saya's face fell, and Warren understood why. San Carlos was a long way away, and the journey would not be easy, especially for someone who had so recently been at death's door. "Thank you," Warren said curtly, and guided Saya back outside before Paul could ask any more questions. On the ride back to the ranch, Saya was quiet. Warren wanted to say something to comfort her, but he did not know what. When they got back, she went straight to the bedroom and closed the door. Warren stood in the main room, feeling helpless and frustrated. He made dinner that evening, a simple meal of beans and cornbread, and knocked softly on the bedroom door. "Saya, you need to eat." She opened the door, and he saw that she had been crying. The sight hit him like a physical blow. "I do not know if they are even there," she said, her voice breaking. "They could have been moved again, or they could be sick, or dead. And even if I find them, what then? Will they let me stay? Or will they send me away for abandoning them?" Warren set the plate down on the nearest surface and took her hands in his. "You did not abandon them. You stayed with your grandmother. You honored her in death. No one who matters will blame you for that." "You do not know that," she whispered. "No," he admitted. "But I know that you are one of the strongest people I have ever met. You survived things that would have killed most people. You will survive this too." She looked up at him, and there were so many emotions swirling in her dark eyes that he could not name them all. "Why do you care so much?" "You barely know me." Warren opened his mouth to give some practical answer, some reasonable explanation, but what came out was the truth. "Because from the moment I saw you at my gate, something in me recognized something in you. I do not know how else to explain it. It was like my soul had been asleep, and you woke it up." Saya's breath caught, and for a moment they just stood there, hands joined. the air between them crackling with unspoken feelings. Then she stepped forward and laid her head against his chest. Warren wrapped his arms around her carefully, like she was something precious that might break. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other while the evening deepened into night around them. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both natural and impossibly fragile. Warren knew that this could not last forever, that eventually Saya would need to find her family, or at least try. But for now, he let himself exist in this small pocket of time where it was just the two of them, working the ranch and learning each other in 100 small ways. He learned that she loved horses and had a gift for calming even the most skittish animals. He learned that she sang while she worked, old Apache songs that made his chest ache with their beauty, even though he did not understand the words. He learned that she was stubborn and proud and generous, that she felt things deeply, but kept them close to her chest, protected. She learned that he woke before dawn every morning without fail, that he had a scar on his shoulder from a rattlesnake bite when he was 16, that he had built this ranch with his own hands after his parents died in a cholera outbreak. She learned that he was kind but not soft, that he had strong principles and would not compromise them for anyone. She learned that he made her feel safe in a way she had never felt before, like she could finally stop running and just be. One evening in late November, Warren came back from checking the fence line on the western edge of his property to find Saya sitting on the porch steps, her knees drawn up to her chest. Something about her posture made alarm spike through him. "What is wrong?" he asked, swinging down from his horse. She looked up at him, and her face was troubled. "A man came by today. He said he was from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. He was looking for Apache people who had not reported to the reservations." Warren felt ice settle in his stomach. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. I hid in the barn until he left. But Warren, he will come back, and if he finds me here, he will take me away. He might even cause trouble for you for harboring me." Warren sat down beside her on the steps. "Let him try. This is my land and you are my guest." "It does not work like that," Saya said, and there was a hopelessness in her voice that cut him to the core. "They have the law on their side. They can do whatever they want." Warren was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "Not if you are my wife." Saya's head whipped around to stare at him. "What? Marry me," Warren said, the words coming faster now as the idea took shape. "If you are my wife, you would not be subject to the same rules. You would be living here legally as a rancher's wife. They could not touch you." "Warren, you cannot be serious," Saya said, but he could hear something like hope creeping into her voice. "I have never been more serious about anything in my life," he said, taking her hands. "I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other for a few weeks. But Saya, I have felt more alive, more whole in these past weeks than I have in years. You asked me why I care so much, and I told you that you woke something up in me. That was true, but it is not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since the moment I saw you at my gate, and if marrying me means keeping you safe, then that is reason enough. But I am also asking because I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore." Saya was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was also smiling. "I thought I was alone," she whispered. "I thought what I was feeling was just gratitude or some trick my mind was playing because you saved me. But it is not. Warren, I love you. I think I have loved you since you put that first bowl of water to my lips and looked at me like I was a person, not a problem to be solved." Warren pulled her close and kissed her, soft and careful and full of all the things he did not have words for. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to frame his face, and it felt like coming home. They were married 3 days later in a small ceremony at the mission church in Oro Blanco. The priest, Father Miguel, asked no questions about Saya's background, just smiled kindly and spoke the words that bound them together. Warren's nearest neighbor, a widow named Clara Brennan, stood as their witness and gave Saya a beautiful turquoise necklace as a wedding gift. "My late husband bought this from an Apache craftsman many years ago," Clara said, fastening it around Saya's neck. "I always thought it should go back to someone who would appreciate its true value." Saya touched the necklace with trembling fingers. "Thank you. This means more than you know." That night, Warren carried Saya over the threshold of the ranch house that was now truly their home. He had cleaned everything until it shone and had picked wildflowers to put in a jar on the table. It was not much, but he wanted her to feel welcomed, celebrated. "You did not have to do all this," Saya said, looking around with wonder in her eyes. "I wanted to," Warren replied. "You deserve to be celebrated, Saya. You deserve to feel special." She turned to him, and the look in her eyes made his breath catch. "You make me feel special every day. Just by the way you look at me, like I am the most important thing in the world." "You are," Warren said simply. "To me, you are." They came together with a tenderness that made Warren's chest ache. He had been with women before, brief encounters that had meant little in the grand scheme of his life. But this was different. This was Saya, his wife, the woman who had stumbled into his life and changed everything. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word was a promise and a prayer all at once. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, the moonlight streaming through the window and painting silver patterns on their skin. Saya traced the scar on his shoulder, and Warren played with her long dark hair, marveling at how soft it was. "Are you happy?" he asked, needing to know, needing to hear it. "Yes," Saya said, and there was no hesitation in her voice. "I never thought I could be this happy again. After everything that happened, after losing my grandmother and my family, I thought happiness was something that happened to other people. But you gave it back to me. You gave me a home and a future and love. You gave me everything." Warren kissed her forehead. "You gave me the same. Before you, I was just going through the motions. Working the ranch, surviving but not really living. You showed me the difference." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Warren slept better than he had in years. The winter that followed was mild by Arizona standards, though they had a few cold snaps that made Warren grateful for the thick adobe walls of the house. Saya threw herself into life on the ranch with a determination that amazed him. She learned to rope cattle, to brand calves, to fix tack and mend fences. She was a natural with the horses, and soon she was training them as well as Warren could, if not better. But it was not just her skills that impressed him. It was the way she brought warmth and light to the ranch. She cooked meals that made him look forward to coming in from the fields. She sang while she worked, filling the air with music. She left little signs of her presence everywhere: a blanket draped over the chair, flowers in a jar on the windowsill, her boots next to his by the door. The ranch stopped being just a place where Warren worked and slept. It became a home, full and rich and alive. In February, the man from the Bureau of Indian Affairs came back. Warren was in the barn when he heard the sound of a horse approaching. He walked out to see a thin man in a dusty suit sitting on a tired-looking gelding. "Can I help you?" Warren asked, keeping his voice neutral. "I am looking for Warren Brigham," the man said. "You found him." The man dismounted and pulled out a notebook. "I am Agent Thomas Whitfield, Bureau of Indian Affairs. I was through here a few months back, looking for Apache individuals who had not reported to their designated reservations. I heard you might have information." "From who?" Warren asked. Whitfield's eyes narrowed. "That is not important." "Do you have any Apache people on your property?" "My wife is Apache," Warren said calmly. but she is not subject to reservation orders because she is married to me and living on private land." Whitfield's face darkened. "Convenient marriage, is it?" Warren felt anger flare hot in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "I do not appreciate your tone. My marriage is legal and legitimate. If you want to verify it, you can check with Father Miguel at the mission church in town. He performed the ceremony." "I might just do that," Whitfield said. "And I will be checking in on you regularly to make sure everything is as you say." "You do what you need to do," Warren said, "but do not come onto my land again without an invitation. Next time, I might not be so friendly." Whitfield mounted his horse with a scowl and rode off. Warren watched him go, his fists clenched at his sides. He knew this would not be the end of it, but he also knew that he would do whatever it took to protect Saya. When he went back inside, Saya was standing by the window, her face pale. "I heard." "It is fine," Warren said, going to her and pulling her into his arms. "He cannot touch you. You are my wife. You belong here." "What if he causes trouble?" Saya asked. "What if he tries to take me anyway? Then he will have to go through me," Warren said fiercely. "And I promise you, that will not be easy." True to his word, Agent Whitfield did check with Father Miguel, and he did come back twice more over the next few months. But each time, Warren met him at the property line and turned him away. Saya was legally his wife, and there was nothing Whitfield could do about it, no matter how much he might want to. As winter turned to spring, Saya began to relax again. The constant fear that had shadowed her eyes started to fade, replaced by something brighter and more hopeful. One morning in April, Warren woke to find her being sick in the basin by the bed. "Are you all right?" he asked, immediately concerned. Saya wiped her mouth and looked at him with a mixture of nervousness and joy. "I think I am pregnant." Warren felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. "You think? My monthly courses have not come in 2 months, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings, and my breasts are tender." She blushed as she said it, but she held his gaze. "I am fairly certain." Warren crossed the room in 2 strides and gathered her carefully into his arms. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Saya asked, and he could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "Happy?" Warren pulled back to look at her face. "Saya, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. We are going to be parents." She smiled then, a smile that lit up her whole face. "Yes, we are." Clara Brennan, who had some experience with midwifery, confirmed Saya's suspicions a few days later. "The baby would come in late November or early December," she said. She gave Saya advice on what to eat and how much to rest, and promised to be there when the time came. The pregnancy was not easy. Saya was sick most mornings for the first few months, and the summer heat made her exhausted and swollen. But Warren had never seen her more beautiful. There was a glow about her, a softness that had not been there before. He caught her sometimes with her hand on her growing belly, a look of wonder on her face, and it made his heart swell so much he thought it might burst. He became fiercely protective, almost to the point of being overbearing. He did not want her doing any heavy lifting or riding the horses or working in the hot sun. Saya tolerated his hovering for about 2 weeks before she sat him down and told him firmly that she was pregnant, not dying, and if he did not let her do some work, she was going to lose her mind. "I need to feel useful," she said. "I need to feel like myself. Please, Warren, I promise I will not overdo it." So they compromised. She handled the lighter tasks around the ranch while he took on the heavier labor. She cooked and tended the garden she had planted in the spring and worked with the horses when the weather was cool. And every evening, they would sit together on the porch, his hand on her belly, feeling their child move and kick and grow. In late July, a group of travelers came through, and among them was a young Apache man. Warren was immediately on guard, but Saya went very still when she saw him. "I know him," she whispered. "That is Running Bear. He was part of my camp." Warren's heart began to pound. This could be the link to her family that she had been hoping for. "Do you want to talk to him?" Saya nodded, and together they approached the group. Running Bear looked up as they neared, and his eyes went wide when he recognized Saya. "Saya, we thought you were dead," he said in Apache, then switched to English when he saw Warren. "We looked for you when we got to San Carlos, but there was no sign. Your mother and brother, they mourned you." "My grandmother was sick," Saya said, her voice thick with emotion. "I could not leave her. By the time I buried her and started walking, I had lost you. I ended up here." She introduced Warren, and Running Bear studied him carefully before nodding with what seemed like approval. "Your family is still at San Carlos. They are well. Your brother's wife had a baby girl in the spring. They named her after your grandmother." Saya's hand flew to her mouth, and tears streamed down her face. Warren put his arm around her, supporting her while Running Bear continued. "I am traveling to San Carlos now with supplies. I could take a message to your family if you want. Let them know you are alive and well." "Yes," Saya said immediately. "Please, yes." They invited Running Bear to stay for dinner, and he told them more about life on the reservation. It was hard, he said. Food was often scarce, and the land was not good for farming. Many people were sick. But they were surviving, and there were efforts to make things better. Before he left the next morning, Saya gave him a letter she had written late into the night. In it, she told her family about Warren, about the ranch, about the baby that was coming. She told them she loved them and missed them and hoped they were well. She told them she had found a home and a future, but that they would always be part of her heart. Warren also pressed money into Running Bear's hand, for Saya's family, to help them buy what they need. Running Bear tried to refuse, but Warren insisted. Please, it would mean everything to Saya and to me. Finally, Running Bear accepted with a nod of gratitude. "You are a good man, Warren Brigham. Saya is lucky to have found you." "I am the lucky one," Warren said, glancing back at where Saya stood on the porch, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "Believe me." After Running Bear left, Saya seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She knew her family was alive and well, and they would soon know the same about her. It was not the same as seeing them in person, but it was something. It was enough. The months rolled on, and Saya grew rounder and more uncomfortable as the baby pressed against her ribs and made it hard to sleep. Warren did everything he could to make her comfortable, fluffing pillows, and rubbing her swollen feet and bringing her water in the middle of the night when she was thirsty. On a cold December morning, 3 days before Christmas, Saya woke Warren with a hand on his shoulder and a frightened look in her eyes. "It is time," she said. Warren had been preparing for this moment for months, but now that it was here, he felt panic surge through him. He stumbled out of bed and pulled on his clothes with shaking hands, then helped Saya into the main room. He sent their ranch hand, a young man named Tom who they had hired in the fall, riding hard for Clara Brennan's place. Clara arrived within the hour, calm and competent, and took charge of the situation. She shooed Warren out of the bedroom and set about helping Saya through her labor. Warren paced the main room like a caged animal, jumping every time he heard Saya cry out. It was the worst kind of torture, hearing her in pain and not being able to do anything to stop it. The labor lasted through the day and into the night. Warren did not eat, could not even think about food. He just paced and prayed and tried not to imagine all the things that could go wrong. Finally, just as the clock struck midnight, he heard a new sound, the thin, reedy cry of a baby. His baby. Clara opened the door a few minutes later, a tired smile on her face. "You have a son, Warren, a healthy, strong boy, And Saya is tired but doing well. You can come in now." Warren's legs felt weak as he walked into the bedroom. Saya was propped up against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale with exhaustion. But she was smiling, and in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Warren crossed to the bed and looked down at the baby. He was red and wrinkled and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that squinted up at Warren like he was trying to figure out this strange new world. "He is beautiful," Warren whispered, his voice breaking. "You are both so beautiful." Saya shifted the baby so Warren could hold him. He took his son with trembling hands, cradling him against his chest, and felt something inside him settle into place. This was his family. This was everything that mattered. "What should we name him?" Saya asked. Warren had been thinking about this for months. "What about William? We could call him Will. It means strong-willed and protector, and it starts with W like my name." Saya smiled. "William Brigham. Will, I like it. It is a good strong name for a good strong boy." They spent the next hour just sitting together, the three of them, while Clara cleaned up and then quietly let herself out. Warren could not stop looking at his son, at this tiny perfect human that he and Saya had created together. It felt like a miracle, like something too good to be real. "Thank you," he said to Saya, leaning over to kiss her forehead. "For what?" she asked. "For everything. For coming into my life, for loving me, for giving me this." He gestured to the baby. "For feeding my soul when I did not even know I was starving." Saya's eyes filled with tears. "You did the same for me. I was dying when I found your gate, Warren, and you did not just feed my body. You fed my soul too. You gave me a reason to live again. You gave me a home and a family and love. You gave me everything." They sat there together as the night deepened and their son slept between them, and Warren thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. If Saya had collapsed anywhere else, if he had not heard her fall, if he had been the kind of man who turned away from suffering instead of toward it, they would have missed each other entirely, and his life would have remained the empty thing it had been before. But she had fallen at his gate, and he had fed her. And in doing so, he had fed something in himself that he had not known was dying of hunger. The years that followed were good ones, full of the kind of quiet happiness that Warren had never expected to have. Will grew into a bright, energetic boy with his mother's dark eyes and his father's stubborn streak. When he was 2, Saya gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Warren's mother. She had Warren's light brown hair and Saya's beautiful smile. The ranch prospered too. Warren and Saya worked it together, partners in every sense of the word. They expanded their cattle herd and bought more land. They hired on additional help, including 2 Apache men who Running Bear sent their way, young men who needed work and a place to belong. Agent Whitfield stopped coming around after the first year, apparently satisfied that the marriage was legitimate and that Saya was not going anywhere. Other people in Oro Blanco took longer to accept her, but Clara Brennan's friendship went a long way toward easing Saya's path into the community. And when people saw how hard she worked, how devoted she was to her family and the ranch, most of the resistance faded. In the spring of 1883, Running Bear came through again, this time with a message that made Saya cry with joy. Her mother and brother wanted to come visit if Warren and Saya would have them. "Of course," Warren said immediately. "They are always welcome here. This is your home, which means it is their home too." Saya's mother, Laughing Water, and her brother, Strong Bow, arrived in June with Strong Bow's wife and their 2 children. The reunion was tearful and joyous, full of embraces and words spoken too fast in Apache for Warren to follow. But he did not need to understand the language to understand the emotion. Over the week they stayed, Warren got to know Saya's family. Laughing Water was a quiet, dignified woman who reminded him so much of Saya that it made his chest ache. Strong Bow was protective and initially suspicious of Warren, but he relaxed when he saw how happy his sister was, how well Warren treated her. On their last night, Strong Bow pulled Warren aside. "I was angry when I heard Saya had stayed behind," he admitted. "I thought she should have come with us, that our grandmother would have understood. But now I see that things happen the way they were meant to. She found you. She found a good life. I am grateful that you took care of her when we could not." "She took care of me too," Warren said. "In ways I did not even know I needed. Your sister is an incredible woman, Strong Bow. I am honored that she chose me." Strong Bow nodded, seeming satisfied. "You are a good man, Warren Brigham. Not many white men would have done what you did. Not many would have looked past the color of her skin and the circumstances of how you met and seen the person underneath. My sister is lucky to have you, but I think you are also lucky to have her." "I am," Warren agreed. "Every single day." When Saya's family left, there were promises to visit again, to write, to stay connected. Saya waved until they were out of sight, tears streaming down her face, but these were happy tears. She had her family back in her life, even if they could not be together all the time. And she had Warren and the children and the ranch. She had everything she needed. More children came in the years that followed. Another son, Samuel, born in 1885, and twin girls, Rebecca and Rose, born in 1887. The ranch house echoed with laughter and shouting and the constant noise of family life. Warren had added on to the house twice to accommodate their growing brood. And Saya had turned the yard into a garden paradise, growing vegetables and herbs and flowers. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, Warren took Saya up to a spot on the northern edge of their property where you could see for miles in every direction. It was sunset, and the sky was doing that Arizona thing again, painting the world in impossible colors. "Do you remember what I said to you on our wedding night?" Warren asked, holding her close. "About you feeding my soul." "I remember," Saya said, leaning back against him. "I have been thinking about that a lot lately, about how true it was. Before you, I was just going through the motions. I had the ranch, but I did not have a reason for it beyond simple survival. You gave me purpose, Saya. You and the children and the life we built together. You made me understand what I was supposed to be working for all along." Saya turned in his arms to look up at him. "You did the same for me. When I collapsed at your gate, I was ready to die. I had lost everything I cared about and I could not see a way forward. But you saw me. Not just an Apache woman, not just a problem, but a person worth saving. You gave me back my life and then you gave me a new one, better than anything I could have imagined." "I love you," Warren said, kissing her softly. "More now than even on the day we married. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you too," Saya replied. "Forever." They stood there on the hill as the sun sank below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The years continued to roll by, bringing both joy and challenges. There were droughts that tested their resources and cattle that got sick and needed tending. There were injuries and illnesses and the normal struggles of raising 5 children. But through it all, Warren and Saya faced everything together, their love for each other the foundation that everything else was built on. Will grew up to be a fine young man, strong and principled like his father, with a gift for working with horses. Sarah was clever and curious, always reading and asking questions about everything. Samuel was quieter, more thoughtful, with an artistic streak that showed up in the drawings he made of the ranch and the surrounding landscape. The twins were a matched set of mischief and laughter, keeping everyone on their toes. In 1895, when Will was 17, Saya's brother Strong Bow sent word that Laughing Water was very ill and not expected to live much longer. Without hesitation, Warren and Saya loaded up the wagon and made the journey to San Carlos Reservation with all 5 children. It was a hard trip, a week of travel over rough country, but they made it in time. Laughing Water was able to see all her grandchildren together, to hold little Rose and Rebecca and to tell them stories from the old days. She died 3 days after they arrived, peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family. They stayed for the funeral ceremonies, Warren standing with Saya as she mourned the loss of her mother. He did not try to fix it or make it better. He just held her hand and let her grieve, and when she needed him, he was there. On the journey back home, Saya was quiet for long stretches. Warren did not push her to talk, just drove the wagon and kept the children occupied. Finally, on the 4th day, she spoke. "I have been thinking about my mother and my grandmother, about all the things they taught me, the stories they told. I want to make sure our children know those stories too. I want them to understand where they come from, both sides of their heritage. Then we will teach them," Warren said. "We will make sure they know your mother's stories and your grandmother's songs. We will make sure they are proud of who they are and where they come from." Saya looked at him with so much love it made his breath catch. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I ask myself the same question every day," Warren replied. "About you." When they got back to the ranch, Saya began a new tradition. Every evening after dinner, she would gather the children and tell them stories from Apache tradition, teaching them about their heritage. Warren would sit and listen too, learning alongside his children, marveling at the richness of the culture that Saya brought into their family. The children grew up knowing they were part of 2 worlds, and Warren and Saya made sure they felt proud of both. They attended the church in town, but they also learned the spiritual traditions of Saya's people. They spoke English at school and with their father, but they learned Apache from their mother. They were Brighams, but they were also Apache, and that was something to be celebrated, not hidden. In 1898, Will met a girl in town, a rancher's daughter named Emma who had red hair and a quick laugh. Warren watched his son fall in love with the same headlong intensity that he had fallen for Saya, and it made him feel old and young all at the same time. When Will asked for his blessing to marry Emma, Warren gave it gladly. The wedding was held at the ranch in the spring of 1899, and it was a big, sprawling affair with people from town and people from San Carlos Reservation all mixed together. It was exactly the kind of celebration that Warren and Saya had wanted for their son, a blending of worlds and cultures and traditions. As Warren watched Will and Emma exchange vows, Saya slipped her hand into his. "Our boy is all grown up," she whispered. "He is," Warren agreed. "But he will always be our boy." Will and Emma built a small house on the edge of the ranch property, and soon there were grandchildren toddling around the yard. Sarah went to school in Tucson and became a teacher. Samuel started selling his artwork, beautiful paintings of the Arizona landscape that people came from all over to buy. The twins, as inseparable as ever, opened a shop in town together selling goods they made by hand. The ranch continued to thrive under Warren and Saya's management, though they gradually turned over more and more of the day-to-day operations to Will as the years went on. Warren's hair turned gray, then white, and his hands developed the ache and stiffness of arthritis. Saya moved a little slower too, her own body showing the wear of decades of hard work. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger with time, deepened by shared experiences and weathered storms and the kind of intimacy that only comes from truly knowing another person. On a warm evening in the spring of 1910, Warren and Saya sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were in their 60s now, with grandchildren running around the yard and great-grandchildren on the way. The ranch sprawled around them, prosperous and well-tended, a legacy for the generations that would come after. "You ever think about that day?" Saya asked. "The day you found me at your gate." "All the time," Warren said. "I think about how easily things could have gone differently. How lucky I am that you ended up here at this ranch at my gate." "It was not luck," Saya said. "It was fate. We were meant to find each other, Warren. I believe that." "So do I," Warren agreed. He reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers like he had done 1,000 times before. "You know what I realized the other day? That day when I found you, when I gave you that first bowl of water, I thought I was saving you. But really, you were saving me. I was the one who was starving, even though I had food and water and shelter. I was starving for purpose, for connection, for love, and you gave me all of that." Saya squeezed his hand. "We saved each other. That is what love does. It feeds the parts of us that we cannot feed ourselves." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky change colors and listening to the sounds of their family around them. Children laughing, horses whinnying in the corral, the soft lowing of cattle in the distance. These were the sounds of home, of a life well lived, of a love that had endured through everything the world could throw at it. "I would do it all again," Warren said suddenly. "Every hardship, every challenge, every difficult moment, I would do it all again just to end up here with you." "I know," Saya said softly, "because I would too." As the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky, Warren thought about the story of his life. It had started ordinary enough, a young man working a ranch alone, trying to make something of himself. Then a dying girl had collapsed at his gate, and everything had changed. He had fed her body, and in doing so, she had fed his soul. She had given him everything he had not known he needed: love, family, purpose, joy. Their life together had not always been easy. They had faced prejudice and hardship and loss, but they had faced it together, and that had made all the difference. They had built something beautiful here, something that would last long after they were gone. A family that spanned 2 cultures, a ranch that provided for generations. A love story that would be passed down through the years. "Tell me what you are thinking," Saya said, reading his expression in the way she always could. "I am thinking that I am the luckiest man who ever lived," Warren replied. "And I am thinking that every day I have spent with you has been a gift. Even the hard days," Saya asked with a small smile. "Especially the hard days," Warren said. "Because those are the days that showed me how strong we are together, how much we can endure when we have each other." Saya leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched the last of the light fade from the sky. Around them, the ranch settled into its evening rhythms. Lights came on in windows. The sounds of dinner being prepared drifted from the various houses scattered across the property. This was their legacy, Warren thought. Not just the land or the cattle or the buildings, but this, a family that loved each other, a community that took care of its own, a home that welcomed everyone. The years that followed were gentle ones. Warren and Saya slowed down even more, spending their days puttering in the garden and playing with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They took walks in the cool of the evening and sat on the porch in the mornings with their coffee, watching the sun come up over land they had worked their whole lives. Will ran the ranch now, with help from his own grown sons. Sarah came to visit often from Tucson, bringing her husband and children. Samuel had a studio in town but kept a room at the ranch and came home frequently. The twins had married brothers and lived next door to each other in Oro Blanco, but they were at the ranch every Sunday for dinner. In the winter of 1915, Warren caught a cold that settled deep in his chest. It was not getting better, despite Saya's best efforts with herbal remedies and warm broths. The doctor from town confirmed what they both already knew. At 68 years old, with a chest infection and a weak heart, Warren's time was running short, but he was not afraid. He had lived a full life, richer than anything he could have imagined. He had loved and been loved. He had built something that would last. He was ready. On a February morning, with the whole family gathered around, Warren took his last breaths. Saya held his hand, tears streaming down her face but her voice steady as she spoke to him in Apache, words of love and gratitude and farewell. Warren smiled at her, squeezed her hand one last time and slipped away peacefully. The funeral was held at the ranch, and it seemed like half of Arizona showed up. People from town and people from the reservation, friends and family and neighbors. They told stories about Warren, about his kindness and his integrity, about the life he had built and the people he had helped. But most of all, they talked about his love for Saya, about how he had looked at her like she was the sun and moon and stars all rolled into one. After everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Saya stood at Warren's grave at the top of the hill where they had watched so many sunsets together. She felt the weight of his absence like a physical thing, but she also felt his presence all around her, in the ranch he had built, in the children they had raised, in the life they had created together. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, to the sky, to Warren wherever he was now. "Thank you for feeding my body when I was starving. Thank you for feeding my soul every day after. Thank you for seeing me, for loving me, for giving me everything. I will carry you in my heart until we meet again." Saya lived for another 8 years, staying active and involved in the ranch and the family until the very end. She taught her grandchildren and great-grandchildren the old stories, made sure they knew their heritage, passed down the traditions that connected them to their ancestors. She tended her garden and worked with the horses and spent long hours on the porch where she and Warren had spent so much time together. On a warm evening in June of 1923, Saya went to sleep surrounded by her family and did not wake up. She was 73 years old, and she had lived to see 6 grandchildren married and 21 great-grandchildren born. She had built a life from nothing, created a family that spanned cultures and brought people together. And most importantly, she had loved and been loved in return with a depth and devotion that most people only dream of. They buried her next to Warren on the hill, and at the funeral, her eldest great-grandson, Warren William Brigham Roman III, told the story that everyone in the family knew by heart. The story of how his great-grandfather had found his great-grandmother dying at the ranch gate, how he had fed her and given her shelter, how that simple act of kindness had blossomed into a love that changed both their lives and created a legacy that would last for generations. "Great-grandmother used to say that love feeds the soul," young Warren said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "That we can have all the food and water and shelter in the world, but without love, without connection, without purpose, we are still starving. Great-grandfather fed her body that day, but she fed his soul. And together they fed each other for the rest of their lives. That is what they taught us. That is the legacy they left us. To see people, to help people, to love people, to feed each other's souls and build something beautiful together." As the sun set over the Arizona desert that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and red, the Brigham family stood together on the hill and said goodbye to Saya. But her spirit lived on in the land she had worked, in the children she had raised, in the stories she had told, and in the love she had shared. She and Warren had found each other against all odds, 2 souls starving for connection in a harsh and unforgiving world. And together they had fed each other, nourished each other, and built a love that death itself could not diminish. The ranch continued to thrive through the decades that followed, passed down through the generations. And always on the hill overlooking the land, two graves stood side by side. Warren Brigham and Saya Vigil Brigham, a rancher and an Apache woman, two people from different worlds who had found each other when they both needed it most. Two souls who had fed each other and in doing so had created something that would last forever.